Every person who stayed in the Dalton house spoke of the same dream. It began with a child's distant cries, echoing from a darkened field, the grass wet with cold morning dew. In the dream, the air carried a strange metallic scent, and the sky was always grey, permanently stalled between night and dawn. Every dreamer saw the same crooked willow tree, standing alone near a moss-covered well, and every one of them, without exception, felt the same thing when they approached it, dread so sharp it turned their knees to water. For 43 years, not one visitor left without dreaming of the girl in the well. Some dismissed it as coincidence, others left in silent terror. A few, too shaken to sleep again, fled the property and never returned. But all of them, from relatives to traveling salesmen, described the same harrowing scene. Some even woke up with their fingers raw and dirt beneath their nails. The strangest part, no one ever died in that house. No one vanished. Nothing ever happened in the waking world, just the dream, over and over. The Dalton house became infamous, though quietly so. Locals in the nearby town of Eldridge Hollow whispered of it, but few dared mention it outright. They knew it by reputation, not by name. Some called it the House of the Forgotten Child. Others refused to speak of it at all, as if naming it would invite something unwelcome. At the center of it all was one figure, Grandma Dalton, tall, thin, with sharp eyes and white hair always pinned into a perfect bun. She never left the property, never aged, and never answered questions. Visitors came and went, often invited by vague letters or distant family ties. They stayed one night, maybe two, then left changed, some broken, others quietly haunted, but they all dreamed. And now, you're about to learn why. Before we dive into this chilling tale of loss, guilt, and the terrible power of memory, don't forget to subscribe for more eerie stories like this one. Every week, we uncover the dark corners of forgotten histories, hauntings, disappearances, and mysteries that defy explanation. You won't want to miss what's coming next, because the story of Grandma Dalton is not just a ghost story. It's a truth buried beneath decades of silence, a secret kept alive by ritual, repetition, and fear. You see, the house wasn't cursed by chance. Something had happened there, long before the dreams began, something no one dared to speak of in the daylight. And those who tried, their words twisted in their mouths as if the truth itself resisted being told. But one boy, one unwanted orphan, would change all of that. His name was Thomas Reddick, and when he stepped onto that gravel path in the autumn of 1923, suitcase in hand, he had no idea that his arrival would awaken something long buried. The dream was waiting for him. So were the secrets. And it all began with the sound of a ticking clock. In the fall of 1923, the hills of southern Missouri wore a cloak of rust-colored leaves and heavy skies. The town of Eldridge Hollow, nestled between two ridges and mostly forgotten by progress, still clung to the past with both hands. Horse-drawn carts rumbled beside battered automobiles, and men in suspenders nodded silently as they passed each other on the narrow dirt roads. It was the kind of place where time moved slower and secrets had room to grow. At the edge of this town, past the willow thickets and the iron bridge that creaked even without wind, stood the Dalton house. It rested on Elder Hollow Road, a winding lane named after the dense, gnarled trees that arched overhead like the ribs of a beast. The house itself was a towering Victorian relic, 3 stories tall with faded blue siding and crooked shutters. Ivy crawled up its outer walls like veins, and the white paint on the porch railings peeled in long strips, exposing grey, weather-worn wood beneath. But despite its age and abandonment by time, something about the house looked preserved. The roof held strong, the windows remained unbroken, and the grounds, though wild, felt curated, as if left to grow a certain way, not neglected. Nothing about it felt accidental. The locals avoided Elder Hollow Road. Children dared each other to run up to the front steps and knock, but few ever did. The ones who tried returned pale and trembling, unable or unwilling to say what they'd seen or thought they saw through the fogged glass windows. Inside the house, silence reigned. It was broken only by the steady ticking of clocks. Grandma Dalton was rarely seen in town. She came only when necessary, moving like a shadow through the streets. Her tall frame was wrapped in long skirts and wool shawls, and her sharp features betrayed nothing. No one knew her first name. No one remembered when she arrived. She was simply always there, like the house itself. Strangers who passed through, travelers, distant cousins, occasional boarders, rarely stayed long. Some claimed hospitality brought them there. Others cited vague family connections. None remained more than a few days, and all of them, according to rumor, left in silence, faces pale and eyes hollow. The people of Eldridge Hollow stopped asking questions. On one particularly cold October morning, a black carriage arrived, kicking up red dust as it climbed the hill to the Dalton house. Inside sat a boy no older than 17, his thin hands gripping a worn suitcase. His name was Thomas Reddick, and he had no family left, at least none who'd taken him in. The letter he received was brief and precise. "You will stay with me now," it said. No signature, only an address. 40-13 Elder Hollow Road. The driver didn't speak as he dropped Thomas off at the iron gate. He simply nodded, then turned the carriage around and vanished down the path without looking back. The gate creaked open with a sound that seemed too loud for the stillness around it. Thomas stepped inside. There was no welcoming committee, no warm light in the window, no laughter, just the house and the wind. He climbed the porch steps, noting how each one groaned in protest. The door opened before he knocked, and there she stood, Grandma Dalton, tall, silent, her eyes like wet stone. She did not smile. She simply stepped aside to let him in. Thomas entered the house, and the door shut behind him with a click that echoed through the halls. Thomas Reddick had never been in a house so quiet. The air inside the Dalton home smelled of cedar, dust, and something faintly sweet, like dried lavender left too long in a drawer. The floorboards groaned beneath his steps as he followed Grandma Dalton down a long corridor, her gait steady, deliberate. Dozens of clocks lined the walls, each ticking softly, each set to a different time. None of them chimed. "You'll sleep upstairs. Second door on the left," she said without turning around. Her voice was calm, low, the kind that made children sit up straight without knowing why. Thomas clutched the handle of his suitcase and nodded, though she hadn't looked back to see it. The room she assigned him was simple: bed, desk, wooden chair, a tall mirror in the corner. Heavy curtains blocked the view outside, and the wallpaper peeled in gentle curls at the edges. A small shelf above the desk held 2 worn books and an old oil lamp. But it wasn't the silence or the stillness that made Thomas uneasy. It was the sense that the house was listening. That first night, sleep didn't come easily. The mattress creaked every time he turned, and the ticking from the hall clocks drifted into the room like whispered footsteps. Thomas stared at the ceiling, counting the ticks, watching the shadows stretch and retreat. He rose before dawn, hoping movement would shake the feeling of being watched. As he wandered the hallway, he noticed something peculiar. Small symbols etched into the wood along the baseboards, not carved with force, but gently, deliberately. Circles, triangles, marks he didn't recognize. Later that morning, he asked about them over breakfast. The table was long enough to seat 10, but only 2 places were set. Grandma Dalton served porridge and tea without comment. "What do those symbols in the hallway mean?" Thomas asked, keeping his voice light. She didn't look up. "They've always been there." "But they look new." She sipped her tea. "Some things are meant to stay put, Thomas. Don't go looking where you shouldn't." He let the subject drop, but her answer stayed with him. Over the next few days, he explored the house in quiet increments. The place was vast, more doors than he expected, many of them locked. The attic door, at the top of the stairs, had a heavy iron latch. Once, as he passed it, he thought he heard a sound from behind it, like a soft breath. But when he paused and leaned closer, all was still. One room near the back of the house fascinated him. Inside were clocks, dozens more, all different. Mantel clocks, cuckoo clocks, pocket watches on velvet trays. None of them worked, yet each one ticked faintly like they remembered how. One evening he asked, "Why so many clocks?" Grandma Dalton, knitting by the fire, didn't look up. "Time is fragile," she said. "Best to keep an eye on it." She was full of sayings like that, odd, cryptic remarks that made Thomas wonder if she was teasing or warning. He couldn't tell, but it wasn't just the clocks. He began noticing other things. A bowl of milk left on the kitchen windowsill each night, a line of salt across the threshold of the cellar. The way she'd mutter to herself as she walked the halls after dark, clutching a small wooden cross. Thomas had lived with strange people before. Foster homes, boarding schools, even an orphanage run by nuns who believed in angels and punishments. But nothing like this. There was no warmth in the Dalton house, no pictures on the walls, no family keepsakes. Just ticking, silence, and eyes that always seemed to follow. He told himself it was just adjustment. just nerves. But deep down, Thomas knew something wasn't right. And it wasn't just the house, it was her. The more time Thomas spent in the Dalton house, the more he noticed the rules. They weren't written down, nor were they ever directly explained. But they revealed themselves through repetition, through the quiet, deliberate rituals Grandma Dalton performed every day, without fail. Each morning began the same. She would rise before dawn, before any light touched the curtains, and light a single candle in the kitchen. She'd set out a saucer of milk on the windowsill, humming softly under her breath, a tune Thomas couldn't place. Not quite a lullaby, not quite a hymn. Then she'd sprinkle a line of salt across the front door, careful and measured, like someone drawing a map from memory. Once, he watched her perform the ritual in full. She didn't speak. She moved with precision, hands steady, back straight, as though she had been doing this her whole life. When she caught him observing, she paused, then said only, "Some doors open from both sides, best to keep ours shut." That answer, like everything she said, raised more questions than it answered. Thomas began to catalogue her habits. She never went near the attic. She never left the house after sunset. She always locked the cellar door with 3 turns of a brass key and hung that key around her neck on a leather string. On Fridays, she boiled water with rosemary and poured it slowly down each drain in the house. She never used the upstairs bathroom, and every night before sleep, she placed a small wooden carving, a figure of a girl in a dress, on her nightstand, facing the door. The most unnerving part wasn't what she did. It was the quiet reverence with which she did it, like someone honoring a contract long overdue. When Thomas asked about the figure, she stared at him for a long moment before replying, "She likes to be remembered. That's all." He didn't ask again. Over time, her mutterings at night grew louder. Sometimes Thomas would hear her pacing the hallway outside his room, whispering phrases too faint to make out. Once, just before sleep, he caught the end of a sentence through the door. "As long as she stays quiet." He never asked who. One afternoon, as he helped gather wood behind the house, he stumbled on a strange sight. 7 stones, each the size of a loaf of bread, placed in a tight circle beneath the willow tree. No names, no markings, just a ring of stillness. When he mentioned it that evening, Grandma Dalton froze in the middle of stirring her tea. Her spoon stopped moving, her fingers tightened. "You didn't touch them, did you?" "No," he said. "Just looked." She resumed stirring. "Then don't go near them again, not unless you want to bring something back with you." That night, he dreamed of a child laughing somewhere far below his feet. He woke up with his hands clenched, fingers sore, and still he tried to explain it all away. Superstition, grief, age. Perhaps this was how the old survived, through routine, through the illusion of control. But one evening, as dusk bled into the corners of the house, Grandma Dalton spoke to him in a voice that shook him more than any of her rituals had. "You must never go to the attic, Thomas, never. And if you ever hear crying, you do not follow the sound, no matter where it leads." He stared at her. "Why? What's up there?" She met his gaze. Her voice turned to iron. "Nothing that belongs to the living." The dream began without warning. Thomas didn't remember falling asleep. One moment he was staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant ticking of the hallway clocks, and the next he stood in a field of waist-high grass, damp with dew and colored in sickly shades of gray. The sky above was heavy with unmoving clouds. Wind didn't exist there, nor did birdsong or insects. Just silence, and a single sound, soft and steady, coming from somewhere far ahead. A child crying. The sound wasn't loud, it wasn't panicked. It was the kind of cry that carried resignation, as if the child had been sobbing for a long time and expected no one to answer. Thomas began to walk. He didn't think about it. His legs simply moved as if compelled. The grass brushed against his fingertips as he passed, and the scent in the air was oddly metallic, like old coins and wet stone. Ahead, rising from the earth like a forgotten monument, stood a crooked willow tree. Its branches twisted like arthritic fingers, and beneath them sat an old stone well, covered in moss, its rim cracked, the rope long gone. The closer Thomas got, the louder the crying became. Not frantic, just persistent, a sound that had learned patience. He stopped at the edge of the well. The world around him pulsed with stillness, as if holding its breath. He couldn't see into the darkness below, but the sound was clear now. A little girl's voice, weeping, then whispering. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the rough stone rim. As he did, something shifted in the air. The crying stopped. Silence. He held his breath. A whisper rose from the darkness, soft and close, as if it came from just beneath the surface. "Help me." Thomas jerked back, stumbling into the grass, but he didn't wake up. The world held firm, the grey sky remained, and then something touched his hand. He looked down. His fingers were covered in dirt. Fresh, wet soil clung to his skin as if he'd been digging. Under his nails packed earth. His breath came fast now. He looked at the well again. This time a pale hand gripped the rim, small, childlike, too thin, and then he woke up. The room was dark. The ticking of the clocks returned, 100 soft heartbeats echoing through the walls. He sat up in bed, breathing hard. His sheets were damp with sweat. He rubbed his hands against his nightshirt, trying to shake the feeling, and stopped. There was dirt beneath his fingernails. He stared, heart pounding. The grime was real. Damp, black. He rushed to the wash basin, scrubbing his hands, trying to convince himself it was just a coincidence. Residue from the firewood, maybe. Anything. But deep down, he knew. The dream had been more than just a dream. The next morning, he searched for answers. He returned to the hallway, tracing his fingers along the carved symbols. He peeked through every unlocked door, looking for something, anything, that would explain what had happened. In a side drawer in the sitting room, behind a stack of yellowed newspapers, he found a collection of old, torn sketches. Crude pencil drawings, each one depicting the same thing. A girl at the bottom of a well, eyes wide, mouth open, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming. One was almost identical to his dream, the same crooked willow, the same ring of moss-covered stones. His hands shook as he turned them over, one by one. Someone else had seen her, someone else had dreamed it, and whoever they were, they had been afraid. Thomas knew without question that his arrival at the Dalton house had not stirred something new. He had simply joined something already in motion. 2 days after the dream, Thomas discovered the journal. It was hidden in the back of the linen closet, behind a loose board warped by time and humidity. He wasn't looking for anything, not really, just poking through the house as usual, driven by a restless feeling he couldn't shake. The book was wrapped in a scrap of wool, its cover cracked and brittle, the leather soft from age and handling. The first page was inscribed in delicate, looping handwriting, Lottie M. Ashcroft, summer of 1902, Eldridge Hollow. Lottie, a name he didn't recognize. The entries were uneven, written over several months. At first, the tone was light. She described arriving at the Dalton house as a guest, perhaps a distant relative or boarder. She mentioned the strange rituals, the ever-ticking clocks, the silent rooms filled with shadows. But as the pages turned, her writing changed. It grew thinner, more frantic. Then came a line Thomas read 3 times before it sank in. I had the dream again. She described the field, the crooked willow, the sound of a child crying. Word for word, it mirrored what Thomas had seen. I followed the sound, she wrote, and the well was there again, always the same. And now, she calls me by name. He kept reading. Lottie began to lose sleep. She mentioned scratches on her arms, earth on her bedsheets, strange sounds at night like whispering behind the walls. She spoke of Grandma Dalton, though not by that name. She watches me now, I think she knows. She leaves milk by the windows and mutters in the dark. Thomas turned the pages faster, heart hammering. The entries grew more erratic. The girl was at my window. She won't stop crying. I heard her say, "Why did you leave me?" Then came a single page, centered with a phrase that chilled Thomas more than any dream could. The dream knows. No date, no signature, just that. He closed the journal and stared at the wall, trying to steady his breath. Lottie had stayed in the same house, had seen the same girl, heard the same voice, and the way her entries faded into silence, abrupt, unfinished, it left a question Thomas didn't want to ask. What had happened to her? Back in his room, he placed the journal in the drawer beneath his bed. He didn't want Grandma Dalton to find it. Not yet. He had questions, too many to voice. And part of him feared she already knew the answers. That night, as he lay in bed, he repeated the words silently. The dream knows. What did it know? And why him? Why Lottie? Were there others? His mind drifted to the drawings in the sitting room, the girl in the well, the ring of stones in the backyard. Pieces of something large, too scattered to form a clear shape, but he could feel it pulling together. The clocks ticked louder that night, not in volume, but in presence. as if the house itself had started paying attention. Thomas closed his eyes. He did not sleep. Not yet. Thomas didn't return to the journal for 2 days. Something about it unsettled him. Not just the words, but the feeling that Lottie hadn't simply left the house. She had disappeared into it. Instead, he turned his attention outward. Maybe, he thought, the town knew more than it let on. Eldridge Hollow was the kind of place that wore its silence proudly. People spoke in short sentences. Nods carried more weight than full conversations, and questions were answered with shrugs or half-truths. But Thomas wasn't easily dismissed. On the 3rd Saturday of his stay, he walked the dusty mile into town, collar buttoned, shoes polished, trying to look like someone meant to be there. The general store stood at the heart of the town, an aging structure with sagging beams and windows streaked by years of wind and dust. Inside, he found 3 older men playing cards on crates near the counter, and a woman behind the till organizing a stack of canned beans. They paused when he walked in. "You Dalton's boy?" one of the men asked. Thomas hesitated. "I live with her." "For now." The room grew still. He approached the counter and bought a small tin of matches he didn't need, then asked casually, "The house, has it always been like that?" The woman stiffened. "Like what?" "Strange," Thomas said. "Old, full of clocks." One of the men grunted. "It's not the clocks you should be asking about." That earned him a sharp look from the woman, who shook her head quickly. "Don't start." Thomas leaned in. "Then what should I be asking about?" The man lowered his cards. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "You ever hear of the Ashcroft children?" "No." He nodded slowly. "Most don't. 2 sisters. Lived out on Elder Hollow before the war. Both disappeared one summer, first the younger, then the older, months apart. No sign of where they went. Sheriff said the trail went cold, but people talked." "What did they say?" Thomas asked. "Same thing they always do," he muttered. "Blamed the woods. Said the house was cursed. Said the land wanted something." The woman behind the counter spoke firmly now. "That's enough, Roy." He ignored her. "That house belonged to their family once. Passed hands more than a few times. Folks stayed, then left. Never sold for long, never felt right." Thomas's skin prickled. "Did anyone ever find the girls?" Roy shook his head. "One of them, Lottie, I think, left a diary behind. Her ma said she'd been dreaming about a well, crying, digging in her sleep, just like the rest. Then one night she vanished." The woman slammed a can down. "You're scaring the boy." Roy's voice turned hard. "He should be scared. You stay in that house too long, you start hearing things, seeing things that don't belong to you." Thomas swallowed hard. "Why doesn't anyone do anything?" "What could they do?" Roy asked. "The house isn't breaking laws. It's just waiting." "For what?" Roy looked at him, eyes serious. "For someone to open the wrong door." Thomas left the store with the matches in his pocket and the weight of those words pressing against his ribs. He walked back up Elder Hollow Road slower than before, the wind colder, the trees darker. Back at the gate, he paused. The house loomed quiet and unchanged, but now he understood. This wasn't just a family secret. It was a town's burden, and they had chosen silence. He stepped through the gate, and the wind died. The clocks had begun ticking in sync. Thomas noticed it the morning after his visit to town. For the first time, their scattered rhythms had merged into one pulse, steady, deliberate, almost like a heartbeat running through the walls. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it in his chest. Something in the house had shifted. That afternoon, while exploring the east hallway, he lingered near the grandfather clock. It stood taller than him, with an ornate face framed by thorned vines etched into the wood. He had passed it a dozen times without thinking, but this time something drew him closer. He opened the glass door. The pendulum swayed, even though the clock hadn't been wound in years. Curious, he placed his hand on the side panel and felt a faint breeze. Cold, unnatural, a draft. He knocked against the wood, and a hollow echo answered. With careful fingers, he pressed along the carved edges until one section gave way, clicking softly. A panel slid open. Behind it, darkness. A narrow passage stretched beyond the wall, no wider than a cupboard, cloaked in dust and stale air. Thomas hesitated, heart pounding, then stepped inside. The air was thick, but the floor beneath his feet was solid. He followed the tunnel in silence, his hands trailing along the cold walls. It ended at a door, no handle, just an iron latch rusted with age. He lifted it. Inside was a room no one had seen in years. Light filtered in weakly from a single grime-covered window. Cobwebs clung to every corner. The room held a small table, a broken rocking chair, and 3 boxes stacked near the wall. But what caught Thomas's attention were the photographs pinned to the far side. Dozens of them. Faded black and white images curled at the edges. Most were of children. Unsmiling, staring directly into the lens. All of them indoors. All in this house. Some stood near windows. Others sat on the porch. One photo showed a little girl beside the well, her hand outstretched, her face hidden in shadow. Thomas studied each one carefully. Then he saw it. In 3 of the photos, taken years apart, judging by the clothes, there was the same second figure, a girl, slightly older than the others. She never stood in the center, always to the side, half-shadowed, and in every image her eyes were the same, not blank, watching. He sifted through the boxes and found a rusted locket tied with a velvet ribbon. Inside, a portrait of 2 sisters. One wore braids. The other had her hair in curls. The resemblance to Lottie was unmistakable. But it was the other girl who chilled him, because he recognized her face. He'd seen it in his dream. He tucked the locket into his pocket and stepped back, staring at the walls, the photos, the dust. Whoever had lived in this room had watched the house, recorded its visitors, kept evidence no one was meant to find. He realized then that the house wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. It was documented, observed, curated, and someone long ago had tried to understand it. As he turned to leave, a floorboard creaked behind him. He froze. The room was empty. Still, he didn't breathe again until the hidden door shut behind him. Back in the hallway, the clocks ticked louder. The cellar key had always hung around Grandma Dalton's neck. Thomas had seen her touch it countless times, subconsciously, protectively, like someone guarding more than just a door. She never removed it, not even when she slept. But on a grey morning when the house seemed quieter than usual, he found it left beside the kettle. No note, no explanation, just the key. He stared at it for a long time before picking it up. The leather cord was warm, as if it had just left her skin. The cellar door was at the back of the kitchen, framed in dark wood and sealed with 3 iron locks. He inserted the key, turned it once, then again, then a third time. Each click echoed too loudly in the stillness. He hesitated, then opened the door. A rush of cold air spilled out, thick with the scent of mold, earth, and something older, something stale and metallic. He descended the creaking steps slowly, each one groaning under his weight. The cellar wasn't large. The walls were made of stone, damp and weeping in places. Shelves lined with empty jars and rusted tools hugged the walls. But in the far corner where the shadows clustered thickest stood something unexpected, a well. It wasn't tall like the one in his dream. This one barely reached his knees, but the stonework was the same. Rough, ancient. Its mouth was sealed with a heavy wooden lid, nailed shut at the edges. Thomas stepped closer. Dust covered the surface. Scratches marred the wood. Not from tools, but from fingernails. He dropped to one knee. Tiny indentations lined the rim, dozens of them, like someone had tried again and again to claw their way out. His breath caught in his throat. Suddenly, the air shifted. It wasn't a sound, not exactly, but a sensation, like something had stirred beneath the lid. Not movement, but presence. He leaned forward, ears straining. And then he heard it, crying, soft, distant, muffled by wood and earth, but unmistakable. The same cry from his dreams. He scrambled backward, heart racing. The corners of the room seemed to press inward, shadows stretching, cold wrapping around his neck like fingers. He didn't run. He walked quickly but deliberately up the stairs and into the kitchen, locking the door behind him. He clutched the key in his fist, breath shaking, and turned to find Grandma Dalton watching him from the hallway. She said nothing. Her eyes, always cold, now held something else, resignation. "You went down," she said quietly. He didn't answer. She walked to the table, sat slowly, and looked out the window. "She's been waiting," she whispered. "She never forgot." Thomas stepped forward. "Who is she?" Grandma didn't look at him. "Someone who was left behind." He placed the key on the table. "She's crying," he said. "I heard her." "Yes," Grandma replied. "She cries because we still breathe." He didn't understand, not fully, but the scratching on the well lid, the locket, the photographs, they all pointed to one truth. Someone had been buried down there, and she hadn't been alone. From the moment Thomas stepped away from the cellar, the house changed. It wasn't immediate or dramatic, no slamming doors, no shattering glass, but something subtle had awakened, a shift in the air, a heaviness behind each breath, as if every room had started watching him. That night the clock skipped a beat. He lay in bed listening to the uneven ticks echo through the hallway, some faster, others slower. The rhythm was broken, unsteady, like a heart struggling to remember how to beat. He sat up, suddenly certain he wasn't alone. In the far corner of his room, the tall mirror shimmered faintly. At first, he thought it was his own reflection in the moonlight, but as he looked closer, the figure didn't move with him. It stood still, perfectly still. A girl. Thin, pale hair hanging in tangled strands over her shoulders. She wore a white dress, old-fashioned, with a ribbon tied at the waist. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was turned away. Thomas stared, frozen. Then she moved. Not in the mirror, but in the room. She turned her head slowly, revealing hollow, sunken eyes. Her lips parted. No sound emerged. But Thomas heard the words, clear as a scream inside his mind. "You left me." He blinked, and the room was empty. For the next hour, he sat motionless in the chair by the bed, afraid to sleep, afraid to look again. But nothing else appeared. The next morning he found Grandma Dalton pacing the hallway, whispering under her breath. "Salt," she muttered. "Window, door, candle. Don't look at her. Don't speak her name." He stepped into her path. "She was in my room." Grandma stopped. Her hands trembled. "What did she say?" "She said I left her." Grandma's face paled. "She's stronger now," she whispered. "She's crossing." "Crossing what?" But Grandma didn't answer. She turned and walked away, faster than before, heading straight for the attic stairs. She stood at the base, staring up, lips moving without sound. Then she pressed her palm to the door. "She waits there," she said. "She always has." That evening the manifestations worsened. Doors creaked open by themselves. Cold drafts swept through sealed rooms. The smell of damp earth clung to the air. At one point Thomas found footprints on the upstairs landing, bare feet, small, leading from the attic door to the cellar. And then there was the crying. No longer confined to his dreams, it echoed through the house at dusk and again before dawn. Not loud, but enough to rattle something deep inside him. Familiar now, constant, and laced with accusation. One night as he walked past the parlor, he saw the girl again, standing in front of the fireplace, her back to him. He froze. She didn't move, but the flame in the hearth burned blue. He stepped back. A voice spoke, but not from her lips, from the walls. She was forgotten, but she remembers. Thomas ran to the kitchen and grabbed the locket from his coat pocket. He opened it, stared at the faces of the two sisters. He didn't know their names, he didn't know which one now haunted the halls, but he knew this. She didn't want to be forgotten, and now she wasn't. Grandma Dalton didn't speak the rest of that night. She moved through the house like a ghost herself, lighting candles, whispering to the walls, placing salt in every corner. Thomas followed her once, only to find her weeping softly in the pantry, clutching the wooden figure of the girl she kept by her bed. When she noticed him, she didn't scold. She simply nodded toward the sitting room. "Tomorrow," she said, "when the light returns." He barely slept. By morning, the crying had stopped, but the silence it left behind felt even worse. They sat across from each other at the long dining table. A cup of tea steamed between them. Grandma Dalton didn't drink. Her hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on something far beyond the window. "She was my sister," she said. Thomas didn't speak. "We were children when our mother passed. Father couldn't care for us alone, so we came here, to my aunt's house. It was meant to be temporary." She looked around the room. "But time has a way of keeping you in place." Her voice grew brittle. "Her name was Lydia, younger than me, always smiling, always talking to things no one else could see." She paused. "It started with the dreams. She said there was a girl in the well. A friend, she called her. Someone lonely, someone trapped. At first we thought it was just imagination, but then she began sleepwalking." Thomas tensed. She'd wake up with dirt under her nails, scratches on her arms, and one night she wasn't in bed. A tear slid down Grandma Dalton's cheek. "I found her outside, by the real well, just standing there staring down. She said the girl told her it was time," Thomas whispered. "Did she jump?" "No," Grandma said. She was taken. Her voice cracked. One moment she was there. I turned my back, just for a second, and when I looked again, the rope was swinging, and the stone was wet. She wiped her face. We never found her. The sheriff blamed the woods, but I knew. I knew something older lived in that place. Something bound to the well, to the land. She reached for her tea but didn't drink. My aunt tried to keep it quiet, said the house demanded silence, so we stayed. We buried the grief, and the dreams returned. Thomas felt cold seep into his chest. Others came, she said, boarders, cousins, people passing through, and it always started the same way. The dream, the crying, the girl. Some left in time, others didn't. Why stay? Thomas asked. Grandma looked at him, and for the first time her eyes softened. Because I was the last Dalton, and someone had to keep her in. She took a deep breath. She's not a ghost, Thomas. She's memory, pain given form. And this house, this place, it feeds on both. Thomas reached into his pocket and placed the locket on the table. She's the one in the mirror. Grandma nodded slowly. She wants to be remembered. And she wants to know why I left her. Thomas asked the question anyway. Why did you? Grandma stared at her hands. Because I was afraid. Silence fell. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, but inside, the house was still. Thomas leaned forward. How do we stop her? Her answer came quietly. We don't stop her. She looked him in the eyes. We speak to her. That night, Thomas didn't resist sleep. He let it take him, knowing what waited on the other side. He felt the pull before his eyes even closed, a gravity that wasn't physical, but emotional. Familiar now, inevitable. The dream was the same. The grey field, the willow tree, the cold, still air. But something had changed. The grass was wet with fresh mud. The crying had stopped. He walked toward the well, heart steady but heavy. When he reached it, the moss-covered stones were slick and dark, as if they had just been washed clean. A small shape stood beside the rim. The girl. She didn't look at him right away. Her dress clung to her small frame like it had been soaked and never dried. Her hair hung down in dripping strands. When she finally turned, her face was no longer hollow. It was human, young, pale, and sad. You see me now, she said. Thomas nodded. You know who I am. He didn't speak. The girl stepped closer. They always forget, or lie, or run. I'm not running, he said. She looked down at her bare feet. But you want to. Thomas couldn't deny it, but he stayed. Why do you cry? He asked. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her hand and pointed toward the woods behind the field. They buried me, she said, with silence, with fear, and they never told me why. Thomas followed her gaze. A shape flickered in the trees, a shadow without a form, watching. I waited, she said, and when they forgot me, the house remembered. He stepped forward. You're Lydia. Her lips trembled. They left me down there. I called and called. She didn't come back. Thomas felt the words catch in his throat. She was afraid. The girl looked at him. I was too. Suddenly the ground shifted, not visibly, but the weight of the dream changed. The air pressed harder, the trees blurred, and Thomas felt himself sinking, not into the ground, but into the moment. I want to go home, the girl whispered. You are home, he said. No, she said, this is memory, this is pain. Thomas reached for the locket in his pocket, though it didn't exist in this place. Still, she seemed to see it. She kept it, he said. She remembered. The girl's face cracked then, not in anger but in sorrow too deep for her small frame. She didn't speak, not once. I called for her every night, but she never said my name. A gust of wind rolled through the field for the first time. Thomas stepped beside her. I'm here now. The well gurgled behind them, a sound of water rising. She's coming, the girl said. The house doesn't want peace. Thomas turned but saw only shadows. No figures, just motion. You don't have to stay here, he said. You can let go. She stared at him. Her eyes, once hollow, were now glassy with tears. I'm tired, she whispered, but I'm afraid. So was she, Thomas replied. So am I. The dream trembled. A wind began to howl. The field darkened. Thomas took her hand. Then let's stop being afraid. The girl closed her eyes, and for the first time, the house shuddered. Thomas woke just before dawn. The house was still but not silent. Every wall creaked, every pipe breathed, and the clocks, now in perfect unison, ticked like a countdown. Something was coming, or perhaps it had already arrived. He dressed quickly, the locket heavy in his pocket. The journal lay open on his desk. Lottie's final words burned into his mind. The dream knows. Downstairs, Grandma Dalton waited by the fireplace. Her eyes were sunken, her face pale. She looked older, much older than the woman who had taken him in weeks earlier. "She spoke to you," she said. "Yes. She's listening now." Thomas sat across from her. "I need to help her cross." Grandma nodded, slowly. "The house won't allow it easily. It's bound to the pain. It feeds from it. Then we need to give it something else." From the cabinet beside the hearth, she retrieved a faded cloth bundle. Inside were items Thomas had seen in fragments throughout the house: carved symbols, dried herbs, a broken porcelain doll, and a thin candle dipped in red wax. "These were hers," Grandma said. "Before she became memory." She placed them gently in a small wooden bowl. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached into her shawl and pulled out the iron cellar key. "I never dared face her," she whispered. "I thought silence was mercy. But silence is a lie." They moved together through the house. No words, only the ticking. In the kitchen, Grandma poured salt in a slow circle around the cellar door. She lit the candle and placed it on the first step. "Once the lid is opened," she said, "she'll come through. You'll see things, hear her. But don't let the house lie to you. The house wants her to remain a wound." Thomas nodded, heart pounding. The cellar door opened with a groan. He descended alone. The well waited in the corner, still sealed. But the air had changed. It was colder now, wet, and something new had joined the darkness. Movement. Not physical, but presence. He approached the lid, placed the locket beside it, and set the bowl of belongings on the floor. "I remember you," he said aloud. "I know your name. Lydia." The air tensed. "Your sister never forgot. She just didn't know how to carry what she'd done. But I'm not her, and I won't run." The wood beneath his palms trembled. From deep below, a sound rose. Not a cry, a breath. Thomas closed his eyes and spoke clearly, deliberately. "You were not left behind. You were taken, and now I bring you back." The candle's flame danced. The shadows thickened, and from behind him came a voice not his own. "She doesn't belong in the light." Thomas turned. A figure stood at the bottom of the stairs. Not Grandma, not Lydia. But something shaped like both. Twisted, thin, covered in dripping black vines. Its face was stretched, teeth too many, eyes like broken glass. "You lie," it hissed. "You all lie." Thomas held up the locket. "I remember," he said again. "And that's all she wanted." The creature screamed, and the house shook. The scream twisted through the cellar like smoke, sharp, cold, and endless. Thomas dropped to one knee, covering his ears, but the sound wasn't just in the air. It was in the walls, the floor, the marrow of his bones. The creature at the stairs writhed, its limbs jerking, its voice a chorus of grief and fury. The house groaned, as though every beam and brick wanted to collapse under the weight of that noise. Still, Thomas did not move away from the well. He placed his hand firmly on the lid and shouted above the chaos, "Lydia, you're not alone." The name struck the room like lightning. The figure shrieked again, stumbling back as if burned. Thomas seized the locket and held it high, its silver surface catching the candle's red glow. "You are not forgotten. She remembers you." "I remember you." The shadows pulled tighter, coiling around the ceiling, the corners, the door. Whispers began to rise, words in a language he didn't know but understood. Lies, betrayal, silence, shame. Then a second voice joined them, not the creature's. A child's. I was cold. Thomas turned. From the edge of the room, Lydia stood, her ghostly form no longer twisted or terrifying. She looked exactly as she had in the dream. Her dress was torn at the hem. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were clear. "I called for her," she said softly. "She never came." "She wanted to," Thomas said, barely able to speak. "She was just a child too." Lydia looked down at the locket in his hand. "She still has it?" "Yes." Behind him, the creature snarled, its voice breaking apart. "She left you. She lied. Let the house keep you. Let the pain live." Lydia turned to face the thing that had haunted the Dalton line for decades. "No." The single word struck like a hammer. The shadows convulsed. The ceiling cracked. But Lydia stepped forward and placed her hand on the well's lid. "I'm not afraid anymore." The whispering stopped. Thomas reached for the bowl beside the well and poured its contents inside. The figure, the herbs, the doll, the candle, all remnants of memory, of innocence, of what had been taken. Lydia nodded once, and then the lid shattered. But instead of darkness, light poured out, soft and gold like dawn breaking through fog. It rose in a quiet wave, washing over Lydia's form, the cellar, the walls. The creature at the stairs screamed a final time and vanished like ash in wind, and Lydia, no longer just a ghost, but something whole, smiled. She looked at Thomas. "Thank you." He tried to speak, but his throat was too tight. "I'm going now," she said. "Don't let her be alone." Then she turned and stepped into the light. The cellar fell silent. The candle flickered once, then died, and the house exhaled. Years passed. Eldridge Hollow changed slowly, as all places do. The roads were paved. The store got electric lights. The Dalton house, though, remained untouched for some time. Quiet, sealed, its windows dark. People whispered that the silence had deepened after the boy left. No more crying, no more strange dreams. Eventually the house was sold to the county, then condemned. By 1951 it had been torn down. In its place stood a small park, simple, green, dotted with benches no one used after dark. A brass plaque marked the spot, but no one ever read it, except one man. Thomas Reddick, now grey-haired and slow of step, returned one cool autumn morning. He wore a dark coat and carried a small parcel under his arm. His eyes scanned the space where the porch once stood, where the willow had swayed, where the cellar door had opened to another world. He sat on a bench and opened the parcel. Inside was the locket, still polished, still warm. He held it in his palm for a long time, listening, not to clocks, not to cries, but to the gentle rustle of wind through the trees. Peace had settled here, not silence, not absence. Peace. He had never returned to the dream after that night, but sometimes just before waking he would see her, Lydia, standing in sunlight, smiling, whole. Grandma Dalton had passed quietly 5 years after the cellar was sealed. Thomas had been there at her bedside. She'd said only one thing before closing her eyes for good. She forgave me. And she had. Now Thomas stood, placed the locket gently beneath a stone at the base of a young oak and nodded once. "I remember." The wind stirred gently. He walked away, and the park remained. No dreams. No shadows. Just the memory of what had been broken, and finally mended. If you found this story as haunting and beautiful as we did, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling narratives and forgotten legends. There's always another secret waiting to be uncovered, and we'll be here to share it with you. And if you want to keep diving into the eerie and unexplained, click the video on your screen now for another tale that will leave you wondering what truly lingers in the quiet places of the world. Thank you for watching. And remember, some dreams are not just dreams.